Maryland and St. Mary's for helping to make this event possible. And we're also grateful for the support of Alamo ISSA and Black Hills. Now, this is an interesting year. Last year, I was a volunteer as well, and I was looking up at the stage and said, man, I would love to be up there one day. And I'm actually a speaker as well, in addition to volunteering. So my name is Ben Mickens, and this is Corey Flood. Today, we're going to be talking about rebuilding security awareness and for the AI threat landscape. So basically what's happening is the training most of us grew up with was built to teach the people to spot bad emails or misspelled domains, weird formatting, suspicious urgency, and that training is now obsolete. AI-generated phishing has perfect grammar, perfect branding, and perfect personalization, and the old red flags are gone. And compliance training was already failing before AI showed up, and AI just made it impossible to ignore. So now Corey is going to go over and show you the data that actually proves that.
Hello, everyone. So kind of want to talk to you guys about the phishing case study that was done back in 2025. 12,000 users at a fintech company in the US were part of a case study. They were broken down into 3 groups. There was a control group where no users received any training. There was no interactive lessons. There was another group that received some training. There was no lessons involved. And there was another group that received both interactive lessons and received training. And what is important here is this case study that was performed used the NIST phishing scale. And what that is basically is when we're looking at emails that contain phishing, we look at cues. And what the cues are for users as they're paying attention to these emails is the more cues like misspellings and subject lines that have indications that this may be phishing, we divided those, or the case study divided those into easy and hard emails, right? So what they found was amongst those 12,000 users, those that were receiving those easy emails that were very indicative of phishing, 7% were still clicking on those emails and still interacting with them. In the hard group, those that were hard to detect, those emails that were harder to detect and harder to see if this is really phishing or not, there was a 15% click rate in that group. What's also important about this case study is 36% to 55% amongst the users that were involved for that 4-month case study, the trainings were ineffective. They were still interacting with those emails. They were still clicking on them. They were still not able to identify them as phishing emails as they were. And this is mainly important because despite the training, some of those individuals that were in those control groups that received interactive training failed to identify phishing emails just as high as those that received no training at all. And another key indicator that I want to share with you guys is something called inoculation. And with this case study, good inoculation behavior was someone that was able to identify a phishing email, correctly report that phishing email without any clicks happening at all. And that's what the case study determined to be good inoculation behavior. And the opposite side of that was a click happened before a user was able to report the email as phishing or identify it correctly as phishing. And that allowed threat actors to actually take action in the simulation against those users that interacted with those phishing emails. And what I want you to identify with this as it pertains to compliance is great. As it pertains to those that are in charge of implementing compliance for trainings amongst those in your organization, compliance is great. However, it gives some organizations a false sense of security. Compliance doesn't mean that a user can correctly identify phishing, and also doesn't mean that in a scenario where a user is under attack from phishing, that they would know they're under attack in the first place. As it pertains to compliance, some orgs don't have enough tangible evidence from compliance training, which makes it simply ineffective as users are just going through and clicking through an actual training simulation and not learning anything. So usually when they're usually attacked in the future, they don't learn anything from the trainings and they're still under attack and they still don't correctly identify phishing emails when they are being sent to them. All right.
All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through some of what the threats look like now. We're going to talk about 6 techniques that have already outpaced the training programs in the wild. And what's happened is AI has changed things for attackers. So speed, the attacks that took days of recon, they're taking minutes now. Volume, one person can actually generate thousands of personalized lures, and realism, the output bypasses the filters that have been built to catch the old stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through 6 techniques in the wild that AI is being used. Technique 1 is actually deepfake impersonation. And so what this is you take the AI and you're face swapping. You're basically, if you took my face and placed it on Corey, that would be a deepfake video impersonation. And what's happening is the technology is getting so good now that you can't even tell the difference. You used to be able to just see, blurbs on the lips, but now they have the lip synchronization to where it actually looks like the person talking. And then not only that, it exploits the sensory trust instincts. So if we see something on video, we actually assume it's true. But now because of deep video impersonation, deepfakes, we can't trust that anymore. And the tools that do this, they're free, and they actually require no technical skills. You just click a button and it does it for you. It's getting that easy. And so now we have video. Now imagine voice. The next one is voice cloning and synthetic audio. And the scary thing about voice cloning is it only takes about 3 seconds to do a zero-shot cloning. So zero-shot is basically it takes your voice and it goes through its database of what it has and says, oh, this is a human, and it gives those characteristics to the voice to make it sound like you. But if it has even more time, 30 seconds to 2 minutes, it can actually replicate your voice to sound exactly like you. It has the same tone, the accent, and cadence, and so the attackers, they trick you to thinking that it's actually someone else's voice. And then what they'll also do is they'll put background noise. So say, for example, they have a deepfake phone or voice, and in the background, you're hearing cars or you're hearing people typing on a laptop or something. So you assume they're in an office setting when they're actually in the closet, sending their deepfake voice. The technique 3 is one of what most people think of when they hear about AI phishing. And that is actually the scary part. What they're doing is large language models, they compose personalized and context-aware pretext. So the LLM models are actually doing OSINT, open source intelligence, at a faster pace than what a human can do. And so it's getting these personalized emails that just look legitimate and authentic. And also what it's doing is they're role specific. So you can have, a finance team will get invoice language, HR gets benefits enrollment. So the references from the real events at the company. So it's making these phishing campaigns just look so much more legitimate and real. And then the grammar as well is flawless. Like the single biggest indicator we used to train on was to look for the broken grammar. But now anyone who, English can be their third, fourth language, they can pick up an LLM and craft these phishing emails and phishing campaigns to just look very legitimate. And just a little side note, thankfully we have the next talk is actually going to be talking about that, so make sure you stick around for that. So those are the first 3 that are getting the most attention. And these next 3 are less discussed, but they're equally more dangerous. So now what we have here, they're social bots and coordinated inauthentic behavior. And what these are is they're automated accounts, and they operate in complete synchronization across social networks. And they post malicious links simultaneously, engage with those links in each other's content. And what they're doing is they're gaming the recommendation algorithms. And so the goal is to actually manufacture social proof. And when an employee sees a trending post, they think, okay, that's with 1,000 likes, they're thinking it's legit, but what's happening is that these bot farms are literally just liking it over and over and over and over. And it's creating a artificial social proof that is making it look more trustworthy, and it looks more authentic, but it's really not. It's just 1,000 iPhones in a row just pushing likes. So, and now the next technique actually takes us a lot further, and you're building fake humans. And what this is you have generative models that are creating the fabricated faces, and the LLMs, they actually write comprehensive resumes, they post histories, they have professional bios, and it builds these credibility on these accounts, and they're actually not really accounts, they're fake accounts. They're actually called sock puppets as well. And people, they interact with each other, give follows, give likes, so it's building more credibility and professional legitimacy. And then the last technique is actually fundamentally different from the first five. And what this is, it's prompt injection. And this technique, most people in security have not internalized yet. What's happening is attackers, they hide malicious instructions inside emails, documents, or web pages, and that's called indirect prompt injection. And then when an AI copilot or assistant reads the content, it can be tricked into overriding its own safeguards. And also, people can do what's called direct prompt injection, where they just completely tell the LLM to override its safeguards and directions as well. And the bad thing about this is what happens is even if you have the safeguards in place and the guardrails in place to prevent an LLM from crafting or executing the first five techniques, with prompt injection and jailbreaking, you can actually trick the LLM. So what's happening is the attackers are socially engineering the AI, and then the AI socially engineers your staff. And so the AI actually becomes another attack vector against the people it was designed to serve. And the defenses here are different. You have to constrain what AI tools can read and do, and then you also have to require human approval for sensitive actions, and then also red team your prompts as well. But most organizations have not started in implementing that because they're not aware of what the AI can do. And so now Corey is going to show you what happens when actually one of these techniques meets a real executive and what saved Ferrari.
So with the Ferrari case study that happened back in 2025, actually 2024, there was a threat actor that was utilizing AI tools in a form of phishing. So basically what Ben described, someone was basically impersonating the CEO. His name was Bendito Vigna. Basically captured a sample of his voice, injected it into a phishing tool, and basically called a higher up or a higher exec to request that he sign off on an urgent transaction. Obviously, the call that was made was from a phone number that did not match the CEO. It was made through WhatsApp, through a phone number that didn't match. And the request that this impersonator was making, obviously without any credibility, any kind of documents to back up what he was requesting, prompted for this exec to provide this information as soon as possible. Now, in the real world, if any of us had received instruction from our CEO, we would think we would approve that right away. But because of the mannerisms that the impersonator had, and because of how urgent this request was and how it was kind of out of the norm for someone to, especially the CEO, to come out of the mid-morning and ask for something like this, the exec that was called by this impersonator had prompted him to provide him something very key that the CEO had shared with him days prior. And it was a book that the CEO had recommended. Sorry. You're good. The CEO had recommended a book to this exec that the impersonator was calling. He said, "Hey, what was the name of that book you recommended a couple of days ago to me?" And obviously the impersonator did not know. So the impersonator hung up. And what that shows us is, no matter what the scenario is, impersonators are able to utilize these AI tools to better authenticate their attacks. And most of us in this room would probably cave to a request like that. And so what we really want to emphasize with these trainings that are current in our society and even in our organizations is that threat actors are changing the way they're attacking. They're no longer just going through email channels. They're using phishing, they're using smishing, sending text messages that are not authentic, and using other channels that are no longer just email compromised. So that's a pretty good example of what we're indicating as AI is becoming more advanced with the threat actors.
All right. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is we're going to move into Act 3, and I'm going to walk through the 4 foundations that will make a program that's designed to change these behaviors possible. So these are the foundation that the program that we set up, or the format, is based on 4 different foundations, 4 different bodies of knowledge. And what happens is we have NIST, it gives us the vocabulary and the federal mandate. SANS, it gives us the maturity roadmap. And then we have the FOG model and ADA, they give us the behavioral design. And then finally we have andragogy, and it gives us the adult learning architecture. And so no one is bridging all 4 of these to create their programs and security awareness programs. And this intersection is what we came up with that will help kind of institute the behavior change that is needed and the culture change within the organizations. So NIST, Special Publications 850, version 1, it was first, NIST was first, 850 was first published in 1998, and for 26 years, it was the standard reference, and it was completely silent on behavior change. And then in September 2024, NIST, they published revision 1, and they renamed it Building a Cybersecurity and Privacy Learning Program. And what they did is they folded in 800-16, it was the role-based training guidance, and then for the first time, the federal standard, it explicitly mandated that behavior modification has to be a part of the program lifecycle. And this NIST Special Publication 850 Revision 1, it actually aligns with NIST CSF Framework 2.0 and the new govern function of that. And it requires privacy tracking and measurable behavioral outcomes. And if you work in federal or CMMC or any critical infrastructure, the NIST is your authority, and you use the language and you cite the document, and this vocabulary will open doors. But NIST, it tells you the what and the why, but it doesn't tell you the how. And so for the how, we actually go to the next step. And here we have the SANS, Security Awareness and Culture Maturity Model. This was developed by Lance Spitzner at SANS, and he's been teaching this model since 2011. And the 2026 refresh is actually the model that's up on the screen right here. It's designed in 5 stages, and these 5 stages are the stages in which your security awareness program, it transitions through. At the first stage, we have non-existent, so basically there is no kind of security awareness program within your culture. And then at stage 2, we have what's compliance focused. And that was the compliance box that Corey had talked about earlier, where they're just doing something to check the box to get it done and to say that they've done it. Stage 3 is where they're promoting awareness and behavior change. And then as you move to stage 4, it becomes a long-term culture change. And then at stage 5, you actually have optimization and resilience. And the 2 rules: first, almost every program in the country is at stage 2, and they think it's at stage 3. And then second, you can't skip the stages. You actually have to go through them. And if you take one diagram home from this talk, this is probably the most important, is to make sure that your programs are going through these stages, because once you go from 2 to 3, that's when you'll actually start getting the behavior change instead of just checking the compliance. And that transition from 2 to 3 is actually the hardest transition in the entire model. And this is where the programs get stuck. It's not a technology problem, it's a vocabulary problem. Because when you call it training, it reports to HR. But when you call it human risk management, it reports to the CISO. When you call it awareness, it gets a part-time owner, someone who doesn't really care about it. But when you call it human risk, it gets a dedicated full-time employee, someone who is working on that program and instituting the changes. And SANS, they actually made this exact pivot in their own branding. It used to be called, the course that teaches this, used to be called Managing Security Awareness, but they have since changed it to Managing Human Risk, because that's what it's about. It's about changing behavior and managing the risk that is inherent in our corporations, but also that these AI threat vectors are taking advantage of. And the words, they're not soft. These words, they actually decide the budget. And so if you change the wording, that actually institutes the budget change and will help implement these programs. And then now once you have the vocabulary and the roadmap, here's the other part. You need the behavioral toolkit. So this right here is the behavioral psychology stack that we're going through, and the first part of that is called the Fogg behavior model. This was coined by Dr. B.J. Fogg at Stanford, and it's actually a brutally simple model. Behavior happens only when three things converge. You have motivation, ability, and a prompt all at the same moment. So if we were to apply this to security, why don't people enable multi-factor authentication? Most people assume it's a motivation thing. They send an email saying MFA is important. We have to do this. But for most users, MFA is actually an ability problem. The setup, it's confusing. The recovery is confusing. And so if you are able to change the ability side, the behavior will change without motivation. So if you shift right, actually in this case, to make it easier to do at that same level of motivation, the prompt will succeed. And so how does that translate to MFA? You simplify the enrollment. You can pre-populate the settings. You send the prompt at that right moment, and you make it easy for them. And even if their motivation is not high, it becomes a more successful program. And so that's how you get this. The model changes. This single model changes how a program designs every intervention, because a lot of times if you're forcing that motivation on someone, you have to make it easy for them. But if the motivation's high, then it can be something harder to do. But you got to keep this model in mind if your employees aren't motivated or your company's not motivated, then you have to ask yourself, well, is it too hard for them to do? And so that's the key with the Fogg behavior model. And then the second part of this is we actually have the ADA model. And now this is more of a marketing stack, but it stands for attention, interest, desire, and action. And so with the attention, what you're doing is you're interrupting the pattern. And for your cyber program, you have to make that threat feel real and personal. That will get the attention of your employees and say, wait a minute, something's going on here. And then you have to pique their interest. And so to pique their interest, you can connect the threat to their role, the risks of their role, or to their data. You could say this affects you, and that will make them more interested in it. And then you have desire. So you want to build the motivation through relevance and consequence. And once again, building that motivation, if you remember the Fogg model, it will actually make you more successful in your program. And then the last part is action. You deliver a clear, immediate behavior for them to perform. So you tell them what you want them to do. And so the takeaway from this slide is that you stop building trainings and you start running campaigns. You think of it like a marketing campaign, and you use the psychology, the Fogg model, and the ADA stack, and it will help change the behavior, because that's where we're going here. We're trying to go from stage 2 to stage 3, and the important part of that transition is going from checkbox compliance to behavior change. And so the last part, this is something near and dear to me as a cybersecurity educator, is andragogy. And that's the concept of adult learning. And this was coined by Malcolm Knowles, and he established the foundational principles of how adults actually learn. And traditional compliance training violates every single one of them. One of the main things is that adults need to know why. Why are we doing this? Why is this important? And annual training, it actually rarely explains the operational reason behind a protocol. It just says do it, but we're not giving the why behind it, and that's what adults need. Adults also learn through experience, not lectures. So if they're just clicking through modules, or even putting at 2x speed just to get through it, they're not learning and they're not picking it up. They need problem-centered scenarios and active training. They have to experience it and do it and touch things and move, and that's how they will learn. And then also, they need immediate application. So if I can't use what I learned today or tomorrow in my workflow, then I'll forget it by next week. So the trainings have to be immediately applicable for them, and that's how adults learn. We want to do it. We want to apply it. And then also the next thing is motivation. So you need internal or intrinsic motivation and not external. So that motivation has to come from something you want to do, not something you are told to do. And so by instituting these, the behavior change and the adult learning principles, you can actually change your compliance program to make people want to do it and understand why they're doing it. And then if you have them apply it, they're going to learn, and it's going to stick with them. Because that's the importance of the security awareness training, is we're trying to build habits. We're not just trying to check the box. We're trying to change the culture of the program so that if someone does see that phishing email, their first habit is to go in and say, okay, well, last week we were at a barbecue. What plate did you bring me? Or how do I verify what's coming at me instead of blindly clicking the link? So you want to change the behavior and the habits. And so now what Corey's going to do is he's going to take those 4 foundations, and he's going to show you what changes in your program and when you apply them.
So what he's identifying right now in terms of behavior change is what we would call the operational model. We want to define a shared risk vocabulary across the org, so everyone speaks the same language. Obviously, in different organizations, that may look different. However, for your specific organization, it's identifying how we want to identify threats, what is good and what is bad, and what do we call certain things in our organization so that everyone's on the same page and able to speak the same language. The second thing we want to do is build a human risk register. And what that means is every department operates differently. So for example, with HR, they have, not HR, finance, sorry. With finance, they operate with different reports, different transactions that aren't really available to the rest of the organization. So what does that make them susceptible to? Well, it makes them susceptible to BEC compromise or business email compromise. So you'll typically see emails that are tailored for finance to be something like I mentioned earlier with the phishing. But if we wanted to bring it to example with email, we could say something like a threat actor sent, hey, I need certain reports from you. That's an urgent matter. Can you send that right away? Or with a CEO where they're receiving SMS messages, or like we said earlier with phishing, they're receiving messages that are prompting them to send something that's urgent, right? And then in terms of multi-vector simulations, attackers are no longer just sending emails to compromise your organizations. They're using different methods that I mentioned earlier with smishing and vishing and even with quishing, right? So they're using different vectors to attack. So our job as we're training our users in our environment is to simulate these things and make them more prevalent so that people can become more aware of how they're being attacked. Because if you don't know how you're being attacked, you'll never be able to identify it and report it efficiently. And as I mentioned earlier with the risk vocabulary, so identifying and training, how do we want to train our users to correctly identify certain threats? And what is the vocabulary that we're teaching them as they are reporting these things, and the click rates in the first time to report is decreasing. We see a correlation with users that receive training that is not just simulated and not just with email. There is a percentage of users that decrease the amount of time that they report these email compromise or these email attacks, these email phishing attacks. The more susceptible they are to these trainings. And so with the human risk register, like I mentioned earlier, just mapping risk to behaviors. So as I mentioned with finance, if the main thing we're worried about with them is finance reports being leaked and confidential information being leaked, we want to change the behaviors of those individuals that are in those departments so that those type of things don't happen. And I already talked about this. Okay. And in terms of the drills that we can start implementing with our trainings, with email campaigns, making them a mixed difficulty. So allowing certain people to receive more easily identifiable emails that have like misspellings, or the subject line doesn't match the sender and what their intention is. With smishing, sending those kind of SMS messages to people that are in our organization that maybe send out SMS to clients or users within the org. Vishing, using those type of attacks and simulations with higher execs and CEOs that may receive calls from individuals that are pretending to be someone that they're not. And then deepfake tabletops. And we're talking about more like C-suite. So kind of showing them the ropes of what we're talking about. Because if you try to talk to a CEO about anything security, that's not their main focus. Their main focus is helping the company run and help it being successful. So kind of showing them in a tabletop format what these attacks look like and how they can identify them. All right, that's you. All right, so we're going to talk about the 90-day change that can be implemented into your program. So for the first 30 days, we want you to score your current posture of your internal program using a SANS 5-stage model that Ben mentioned earlier. So those 5 stages have to be done in order. So you have the first stage where you have no program set in place. The second stage, which is your compliance, you have people that are doing training, simulations and trainings, but they're really just clicking a button, right? And stage 2, establishing a human risk assessment. So assessing where your internal organization is as it pertains to that model. Stage 3, cross-functional advisory boards, establishing a board that oversees the change in risk behavior in your organization, and they correctly identify different behaviors that they want to change in their training. And then 4, drafting a human risk management program to secure executive backing and budget authority. So essentially whatever training that you're implementing, having a budget set for that training and being able to effectively implement that training once it is established. And that's the first 30 days. From days 31 through 60, behavioral mapping. As I mentioned earlier, we are mapping the correct behaviors or the correlating behaviors with the risk. So if we know that certain departments are susceptible to certain attacks, we are directly drafting training that is going to help them be able to identify those risks and be able to mitigate, or not even mitigate, be able to identify them and not entertain them as they are being distributed. Being able to deploy mandatory out-of-band verification protocols. So if someone is being prompted to do an action, they are not just performing the action that they're being prompted to do, they're getting verification from whoever it is that's calling and saying, hey, I need this. We're going through direct channels. So if you, let's say, use Teams, and you have that person's direct contact information in Teams or their direct DM, we're messaging that person saying, hey, did you actually request this? Is this actually you? If it's a phone call, we're not answering the phone. We're not even entertaining that phone call. We're hanging up that call and actually dialing that person directly and saying, hey, is this actually you requesting this item? And finally, for the last 30 days, day 61 through 90, we are actually launching this campaign, and we're actually training people through what I mentioned earlier, through inoculation. So slowly exposing users to different training methods, and over time increasing the difficulty for them to identify what it is that they're receiving, whether it's an email, whether it's a phone call, whether it's an SMS. And once that campaign is launched, we're looking for what we call a report rate. So as these campaigns and simulations are being launched internally, are they correctly identifying them, and are they reporting them accordingly after they're being sent out? And finally, Ben's going to close us out with the policy actions you can take immediately after implementing this campaign launch.
Okay, so before you leave today, these are 4 policy updates that you can start on Monday. The first one is acceptable use policy. What you want to do is you want to explicitly add boundaries for AI tools and shadow AI. If you're not familiar, shadow AI is, say you have a software developer, they're working on a program, and they're saying, hey, if I had an LLM like Claude or Gemini, this would be so much easier. And so let me just upload this onto my program, and then I'm just going to use it. That's shadow AI, and there's dangers within that. So you need to put those boundaries within your acceptable use policy. And then 2, for corporate communications, you actually want to mandate internal labeling for any AI-generated content that is distributed to the staff, just so that they're aware that, hey, this is an AI, this is AI-generated. You want that full disclosure. And then 3, you actually want to develop an incident response playbook. So you want to write a dedicated escalation track for suspected deepfakes. So what happens if, hey, I think this is a deepfake, well, what do I do now? You have to make that playbook so that they're not guessing when the time hits. They need to know what the protocol is so that if they suspect a deepfake, who do they call? What other channel do they use to verify? What is the protocol? So you want to have that within your playbook as well. And then 4, you actually want to have access control policies. So you want to enforce strict validation for automated non-human identities. If you were in the last talk, that was exactly what we talked about. You don't want to give the keys to the AI. So that's how that works. And these are not optional enhancements. They're foundational requirements for operating in this AI-enabled threat environment that we're facing now. And then, so now here is actually the big picture of why this all matters. So basically, your workforce is your largest distributed detection tier. You have thousands of sensors operating in real time across every attack surface. And so the technical tools, they filter signatures, but the humans, they're actually able to detect intent, their tone, and contextual anomalies that no algorithm can reliably catch. And that the Ferrari executive that Corey talked about, it didn't run a signature match. He felt something was off and he verified. So that's why you have to think of your workforce as your sensor network. And then once again, you want to replace click rate with report rate as your primary measure. You want to see, are they reporting these? Is someone being alerted to this and letting us know, as opposed to, oh, we got him this time, click, you're checking it off. You don't want to be doing that. You want to encourage, it's more like encouraging the good type of thing. And the click rate tells you who failed, but the report rate tells you who's actually actively defending the organization. The report rate tells you who's paying attention and who's doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're your sensor network. And that's the metric of a security-aware culture that you want to be instituting when you're making these changes within your organization. So basically, to summarize everything, kind of the TLDR, in case you were, a little snoozing. But first off, spot the fish, it's dead. There's zero correlation between training and click reduction. And then also the check boxes, they don't equal the risk reduction. Remember the study that we talked about, and that they had all these the 3 different types of training programs, and everyone went through them, but they still ultimately they failed, and they didn't meet the metrics that were designed for that campaign. Second, I went through the 6 different attack vectors. So AI is giving attackers 6 new weapons. We have deepfakes, we have voice cloning, we have AI phishing at scale, social bots, and synthetic personas. So all of this, it's lowering the time, cost, and skill that is able to attack your organization and to trick your employees and cause them to give away their give away their information. And then third, we went through the Ferrari case. So this one was important because it proves that the fix is a human habit, not more technology. It's you're trying to make these changes within your organization, and that one verification question actually stopped a multi-million-dollar fraud. Because he said, what was that book I recommended? And that stopped it. And so those are the habits that we're trying to build. And in order to do that, we went over the 4 pillars of the rebuild. We had the NIST Special Publications 800-50, and that gives you the structure. So it gives you how you're going to structure your program, the rules, what you need to do. But then you ask yourself, well, how do I do that? And that's where we introduced the SANS maturity model, and that gives you the roadmap. So remember, when you're making these changes within your organization, you assess yourself within that model. You say, where are we at? And you have to be honest with yourself. If you don't have a program, you're definitely at stage 1. But if you have a program installed, you have to honestly ask yourself, are we stage 2 or are we stage 3? Yes, we'd love to say we're stage 3, but if it's actually a compliance checkbox, then be honest with yourself, because then once you realize where you're at, you can make the moves to get to where you want to be. And then after that, we introduced the FOG and the ADA models. And so these will actually help you with the behavioral design. They will institute the changes that you're trying to make. We had the FOG model. Remember, if the motivation is low, you need to make it easy. If the motivation is high, then you can have harder to do programs. And the example we gave was multi-factor authentication. Okay, if they're being told they have to do it, but then at the same time it's hard to implement the multi-factor authentication, they're not going to do it. So to make these behavioral changes, you have to look at that model and think about, am I making these steps too hard for my employees who I'm already having to pull their teeth to get to do this? And so once you've figured that out, you can design your programs to help you out. And then we also had the ADA model. So remember, it's marketing, but you have to build the attention or get their attention, build the interest, build the desire, and then have them take action. Okay, so combining those two, the FOG model with the ADA, it will give you that behavioral change that you're looking for. And then lastly, you have to think about andragogy or adult learning principles. You have to keep these principles in mind, because if you're designing a program for someone and you're not thinking about how does an adult actually learn, then that program is not going to stick with them. If you're designing something for pedagogy, which is teaching kids, then it's a lot different than andragogy, which is teaching adults. Those, you're going to have a mix match, and you're not going to get them to learn. And so if you institute those 4 pillars together within your program, you can actually make some reliable change. And then also we had the budget unlock. Remember, you have to change the wording. You call it human risk management instead of security awareness training, because that will unlock the budget and get you the money you need for this program. You also want to replace completion rates with the behavioral adoption. Okay, so we want to say, how much are they doing what we want them to do, not how much are they doing what we don't want them to do and we trick them to do. So if you're getting people and you're noticing those report rates, then you know that your program is working, because people are honestly doing what they need to do. And then lastly, remember, your workforce is not your weakest link. It's actually your largest sensor network. And so you want to treat it that way. You want to have multi-vector simulations, through email, smishing, phishing, deepfakes. So you want to have all of that within your campaigns, because if you're just sending them the phishing email, you're not preparing them for the world that's actually bombarding them from all these different attack vectors. And so if you're not training them on deepfakes, or you're not training them on phishing calls, they're going to get tricked. So you have to have these multi-vector simulations to institute that change, but at the same time train your workforce. And you want to turn your people from your biggest liability to your earliest warning system. Okay, that's how you make these changes, and how you get from stage 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and ultimately the ball gets rolling. So in practicing what I preach, this is some AI disclosure. Of course, I used AI for this, but this is everything I used. But the main thing at the bottom is we had humans in the loop, keeping the bots in check. That was me and Corey. So thank you, AI. And lastly, I just want to say thank you for spending time with us. Here's our contact information. Remember, I just gave a talk over deepfakes and synthetic profiles. So if your profile looks like a sock puppet, I am not going to approve it. So if you don't have many followers, or just a generic image or something, just send me a message saying, hey, I met you at BSides, type of thing. And so there's my LinkedIn, and then here's Corey's as well. And basically my goal is, I'm an educator. I love to learn it, do it, and teach it. I spent 20 years in healthcare teaching adults, and so now I'm moving into cyber. Corey, go ahead and give his background.
Sure. So I also teach STEM education as well. I work in a SOC right now as a senior cybersecurity analyst. Similar to Ben, I have a passion for educating others, and I can tell you from Ben, I've learned a lot from him. He's probably, he doesn't know this, basically my biggest inspiration in cyber. Someone that I lean on a lot for information like this. And if you guys have any questions, let us know.
So Thank you. And now I'm going from speaker to volunteer role. And just to let y'all know, we have a mentor space in Alkek. And the mentor space is for someone who is either needing to be a mentor or wanting to be a mentor to help others. They also have t-shirts from last year's BSides available. And then one more thing is I recommend you stick around for the next talk for Shane. He is going to be